it's not like they view you as a seasoned cadet anymore. Like, you are a lieutenant. If you're trying to be promoted to first lieutenant, like, as soon as possible, right? Like, CST Cadre is something that you should definitely look into.
So let me ask you this. Do you have any advice for lieutenants going to CST as cadre?
Yeah, so like my biggest piece of advice is...
Welcome to the Oklahoma Podcast. Today we got Claire explaining her experience as CST Cadre. So here we go. So tell me, what was it like showing up to advanced camp again, but as a lieutenant this time?
So it was pretty daunting. Coming from me, I did not really ever wanted to go back to CST. You know, I think you have to just take it in stride, right? So like I was voluntold that I had to be there. It was not like an option that I volunteered for. So I just kind of took it in stride on day one. I was like, didn't know what was going to happen, but I was ready.
Interesting. Like, I actually volunteered to go, and I volunteered to be Basic Camp Cadre, and this was back in like 2020. So because of COVID, CST got canceled, so I didn't be cadre, and I just had to wait to go to BOLC.
I was there from May 23rd. Okay, listen to that. May 23rd to September 1st. So
you are more than...
I am fully qualified to give you this video.
All right,
okay?
So you were there for more than a month and a half, like other people we've interviewed.
The person that did this video the last time, I was there for around 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
If you got any questions, put them in the comments.
So did you have any kind of like time off, or did you just have to like grind nonstop while you were there as cadre?
Yeah, so after the first week, we got assigned to our task force. I was a part of Task Force Merrill, which is the RSOI reception task force. For me, it's all dependent on your cadre. So for my cadre, we had a commander and a first sergeant, and so I fell under them. Okay. My commander, best female officer ever. Shout out Captain Default. Virginia Tech. Yeah, let's go. She took care of us. So we had a rotation. Every other day I was on, and every other day I was off.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was pretty amazing. Now, fair warning, I was only RSOI until July, I think 15th. And so then I switched over to a different task force. But for that period of time, I fell under her command, and I was on a rotation. And so we got our sleep, and we also, like, our days started at 03:30 and went until 2100.
No.
So that was like one day, right? So then the next day you're catching up on your sleep. So it's not like, oh, you're working, you're 9 to 5. Absolutely not. It was not like that. And also, it's not just like you're, chilling out, sitting around doing nothing. Like, you are making sure that cadets on that day are getting received, being in processed, making sure they have all the documentation, making sure they're squared away physically for what's to come with advanced camp.
Okay, so when you had your time off, you didn't like get to go off post or like go to clubs, bars, like go off, do dinner or whatever with your friends, right?
So on your days off, for my command, we could go off post. We could like hang out with our friends. But the biggest thing was that next day at 03:30, you are expected to be at work and do your job. So obviously that comes with a lot of respecting your cadre, but also respecting yourself enough to know your limit. Okay. And knowing what was to come. So like if you know, okay, like, hey, I have to be at work at 03:30. Like, I'm gonna go to bed at 6 o'clock, right? Because I'm tired. The last day I just worked till 2100, and now I have to wake up and like super early, and so you definitely get a battle rhythm, and you're not. It's not like every day is a super party, right? Like, you're doing your laundry, you're making sure your stuff's squared away. Like, sometimes you're out in the field, like, you're making sure you're good, right?
Yeah, nice. So what kind of stuff did you do during RSOI as cadre?
So for RSOI, I did day 1, day 3, and day 5. And then day 5 and day 1 fell back to back. So that's what I was talking about, how I did like almost every other day off, but there was some like back-to-back days. Okay. So the biggest thing was day 1 is when you're getting off the plane. So as a cadet, you're going to be, you have all your stuff. You're going to just have flown from all across the country, and you're going to be looking forward to advanced camp, trying to get that requisite out of the way, right? And then for us cadre, that's when we're receiving you guys. So we're making sure we lay the foundation for you guys to know the expectations, make sure you have your bedding, make sure you guys have you've been signed in, that accountability is a really big thing that day too, and making sure all your bags have been, like, you've received them all.
So is it your fault that I had, like, 2 days before I got my bags, I showed up there covered in mud, and I had to sleep in, like, the airport? You're saying that was your fault?
No, I'm not saying that's my fault. So I was team RSOI.
I'm kidding.
So
I'm kidding.
Let me just back myself up a little bit. So I was team RSOI. We do have an airport team. So to break it down a little bit further, right, there's Task Force Merrill. Okay, we're going to edit Task Force Merrill right here. Now, I was team RSOI, which falls here. But we also have an airport team who, they are literally stationed in Louisville. So they're right here.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who have the bus detail.
Right.
They actually pick you up. They have a receiving line there, and they communicate with us to make sure that when we receive you at Fort Knox, that you're squared away. Sure, when I got there, my original assignment was Task Force Merrill, and so I was on the RSOI team until mid-July. The biggest thing is that even if you're there for extended periods of time, they will shift you task force. So there came a point when we got to the last regiment, which was Regiment 10, and at that point, there was no more need for reception, right? Because our job was done. So at that point, a lot of the senior staff left, and that was their time at CST was over. But then for us lieutenants who are waiting our BOLC date, we were just kind of stuck there. So for me, that meant that I was now a part of Bravo Company Basic Camp.
So before you did basic camp, did you have to, like, do any kind of, like, prerequisite courses or, like, work with the drill sergeants or any of that to, like, learn what to teach, or were you just kind of, like, just there?
So that's a great question. So one of the biggest things I want to mention here is, so I transitioned from Team RSOI. From there, I got 5 days off because they give you a pass, and then you kind of transition to your next assignment if you're there for extended periods of time. So I was there for like 6 months, right? For me, I took that break, and then I had already linked in with my new cadre that I fell under, which was Bravo Company. And the first day I got back, I showed up at 09, ready to go. I didn't know what my job was. I just knew I was basic camp. Oh, wow. Mind you, I've been enlisted for 6 years before I was a lieutenant. Nice. So I had no idea what basic camp was. I was like, is this like
basic training?
Yeah, like is this basic training? Like, is there gonna be drill sergeants yelling at me? Like, funny story, segue. This is actually gonna make it in the thing. So the circle of Army is very small. And the reason I say this is when I was Team RSOI, in my company, I was Delta Company, I actually worked with my drill sergeant from basic training.
Interesting, nice.
So don't burn your bridges, okay? She knew who I was, right? Because, I was a very different person when I was a little private, right? But, the Army community is very small. And they're very supportive, so don't burn your bridges, even in ROTC. So on that day one of transitioning to my new assignment, I was kind of confused, didn't know exactly what my job was going to be. I didn't get really any training or anything like that. However, I got linked in with my first sergeant of Bravo Company, and he was kind of like, okay, you're going to be assigned to a platoon. And I was like, oh, okay, what does that mean, right? Because these are things that you don't necessarily learn just before you get there. These are things you kind of learn while you're there. Yeah, on the fly, right? So I show up. We were doing ranges at that point because I didn't start at the beginning of a basic camp reg. I actually fell in halfway through their regiment. So something else I want to note is, so I was replacing 2 other LTs because those LTs were EOD. And so they have PCS, leave in transit or whatever.
Oh, TDY.
They have TDY en route, right? Yeah. So they had an extra 10 days that people had not considered on that end, so that we were going to be short. They were going to have no lieutenants for the platoons. So each platoon is supposed to have a lieutenant who does all the admin, right? So I was the admin PL for 3rd Platoon. So I got to learn like who those cadets were. I graded them on different aspects. And then something else I want to note is that you have cadets who have just graduated advanced camp. So they're almost seniors in college, and they are with the platoon from day 1 to day 0, right? So they're the entire time, and they really are like almost like constantly observing these cadets. So when I had questions about like a certain cadet, I'd go up to them because I valued their opinion. So it's almost like you're starting to learn, take on that like second lieutenant role of like, oh, I'm not just a nobody anymore. Now I have some power, I have some authority. And I think that's the biggest thing why CST is so valuable is you actually get to learn like, okay, I now have a second lieutenant rank on my chest, right? Like the customs and courtesies. At first I was like, oh no, somebody's saluting me, like, awkward. Oh, okay, like, like, but then you start to grow into it. So I think CST gives you an opportunity to grow into your, like, rank.
Nice.
And I think that that's really beneficial because you will notice the people who have just pinned and show up to BOLC, right? Like, it plays a big factor in moving on.
Okay.
So for me, I was a admin PO, and I think it was super beneficial for me because it was like I started to see, like, how I could empower subordinates and how I could actually make a difference. Shout out Bailey Stone. Love her. Great cadet. She's going to go Air Defense Artillery, right? So it's like, it's not just like, oh, these people are below me. It's like, how can I hear their stories? How can I actually engage with them and also like empower them to think that, hey, like I want to be like this person when I grow up. Even if it's like, I'm just at CST. Like everybody knows like, I didn't want to be at CST, but I was there, right? So it's like, make the best of it, right? Oh, for sure. So I think that's the biggest thing is like taking advantage of those opportunities and really developing those relationships as like appropriately and respectfully. Yeah. So like clearly like those basic camp cadets, it's not like I could just go up to them and have a conversation. That would have been inappropriate. But at the same time, these cadets that were more senior, they were falling under me. I could have those more in-depth conversations about leadership, about their future, and actually kind of mentor. And I think that's the biggest thing that I really found beneficial. Yeah,
so I think what you're saying too, like the whole like trainee versus trainer aspect, absolutely. But then those other the senior cadets that were there, they weren't really trainees, they were just there. For so sure. It's different, right?
Right. Okay. So they fell under a different cohort for sure. Now they were still like, I was still cadre and they were still a trainee, right? Yeah. So there's still very like distinct boundaries. However, with that being said, you can still have those appropriate conversations and mentorship opportunities with those cadets. Whereas like the basic camp cadets, like they're in not basic training. However, they're in like that basic phase. Right. They're starting to build that foundation. So for us, like if once somebody came up to me, they're at attention, they're locked up, and they're scared. Now, like I'm not a very scary person. I think I'm pretty bubbly, pretty optimistic, pretty cute, whatever. But you still gotta keep those lines, right? Because that's how people learn. Like, and I think that's the biggest thing, right? Yeah. Like making sure you're respecting the rank you wear, but also respecting the opportunity that they're being afforded by coming to basic camp, right? So it's really special, for sure.
So let me ask you this. Do you have any advice for lieutenants going to CST as cadre?
Yeah, so like my biggest piece of advice is be optimistic. I understand you might look at it and be like, this is not what I wanted to do, right? Like, and maybe you even try to get out of it, right? You're like, this is like, I'm a good cadet. Why are you trying to task me with CST Cadre? Like, I'm not going to learn anything from it. And I think if you have that approach, you're really doing yourself a disservice, right? Like, at first I was kind of like, why? Why me, right? I think I was kind of like, I'm going MI, like, it's kind of weird.
I scored so high, why am I here?
Yeah, like, why is, like, are you punishing me? Like, what? So, but I think you really have to come into the approach of, like, okay, I'm going to be here and I'm going to help the people that I'm under. And I think if you have that approach, like, for one, you are going to develop some relationships with people that are going to be lifelong mentors. And I definitely got some coming away from my RSOI time that, like, it was the first time in my Army career. So, like, at this point, at that point, I was going on 6 years. So I had never had a female officer who had actually poured into me. Nice. Like, had those really in-depth conversations about, like, what your career is going to look like. What are some obstacles you're going to have to face? What are some things you're going to do? Now, granted, Captain Default, who was my commander in RSOI, she was a logistician, right? So a little bit different, but she still has a perspective that I really valued. And she knew, like, where I was coming from, and she really mentored me. So I think that's another part of CST Cadre that people kind of, I think neglect to mention is not only are you going to be pouring into cadets, senior cadre are going to be pouring into you.
Nice.
And I think you really have to, like, focus on that and take advantage of that. Like, if you're just going into it like, I don't want to talk to anybody, I'm just going to hang out in my room, I'm not going to network at all, you're doing yourself an extremely big disservice.
So you would recommend CST Cadre to other lieutenants before they go to BOLC?
I would say if you are granted the opportunity, go into it with a growth mindset. Do not go into it knowing like, oh, like I wasn't the best of the best, so I'm getting punished. If you go into it with that mindset, you're really going to be doing yourself a disservice. But if you go into it thinking, hey, this is an opportunity for me to be a second lieutenant, to wear my rank and actually like understand the customs and courtesies, the boundaries, and actually just taking on those leadership roles, because just like it's not like they view you as a seasoned cadet anymore. Like, you are a lieutenant. That in all the aspects. If you go get in trouble, you are a lieutenant. You will be punished accordingly, right? So, like, you are a lieutenant, and it's learning how to wear that rank that is so, so important. So I would definitely encourage you to do it if you're given the opportunity.
Not just that, but, like, it also jumpstarts your career, right? Like, you start CST Cadre, that starts your time on active duty, compared to other people that just start their time on active duty moving to BOLC. So you get those few months, or 6 months in your case.
Right.
Yikes, gross. Anyways. But like, it jumpstarts your career, and then it'll make you get to first lieutenant and captain earlier, right?
Yeah, so to piggyback off what Josh just said, so it is super important, right? Like, if you're trying to be promoted to first lieutenant, like, as soon as possible, right? Like, CST Cadre is something that you should definitely look into, right? So for me, I commissioned in April. So my school is a little bit different. We have our spring break in February. I know, weird, right? Weird, really weird. But that means I commissioned in April, and there was a month I just had kind of a hiatus, and then I was right back into Army. But that means my time in service started in May.
Yeah.
So I think that's something you should look into if you're trying to knock out these years. Definitely look into it, because for one, you're going to get that time in service, and for two, you're going to get that experience.
Right.
Even if it might not be in your branch, you're going to get that leadership opportunity.
Yeah, like, $20 is $20. Experience is experience.
Exactly. Like, you're going to get paid the same. I got paid the same then as I'm getting paid as being an S2.
But you get that valuable, that shit that you're not going to get just going to BOLC. I get that. And
like, that mentorship, like, is very different when you get to BOLC. Once you cross that BOLC line, you are now a student. You are no longer a second lieutenant, or, like, about to go to BOLC in that transition period where people are going to, they're going to really want to mentor you, give you those conversations. Whereas when you're in BOLC, you are evaluated. You are in competition season. You better be doing your ACFT. Like, it's go time, baby.
Yeah. If you want more perspectives on CST or other valuable information, then check out these videos that just popped up on the screen right now.